Hi, I'm John F. Allen. And I'm R.J. Sullivan. And we're the Two Towers.
So, having gone through the first third of the episodes, when episode 4 came, I knew that the proverbial shit had hit the fan because not only are we in color now, but we are also introducing characters from the outside of the barrier. And this episode 4, we interrupt this program, introduces us to Monica Rambeau, Captain Monica Rambeau. Now, she is introduced as an agent of S.W.O.R.D. And so to get into a little bit of S.W.O.R.D., basically you have the Sentient Weapon Observation and Response Division. But at this time, S.H.I.E.L.D. is no longer a thing, or at least the public thinks that S.H.I.E.L.D. is just dead. They probably will say later on as the phase 4 continues and we get into phase 5 that S.H.I.E.L.D. was a secret organization and still working undercover, but outside the public eye. But S.W.O.R.D. is more of in your face now. They've pretty much kind of replaced S.H.I.E.L.D. as what the public knows about. And so after the events of Endgame, and Infinity War, now you have S.W.O.R.D. having been created, and Monica Rambeau is the character who we're going to associate with S.W.O.R.D. from this point forward. People who don't know the comics, Monica Rambeau was she was the second Captain Marvel in the comics. She was the first female, and she predated Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel. So a lot of people are like confused when people do the deep dives and they're like, well, wait a minute, that's not right. But it is. She was introduced in Spider-Man, as a matter of fact. And
annual number 16.
Yes. And Peter Parker was looking at it. He was checking her out. He was like, wow, who's that lady? She's foxy, and so she was introduced in that capacity. She was not the same character that we see in this series as she was in the comics. In the comics, she was a cop. She was working for New Orleans, Coast Patrol. She had a amazing relationship with her parents. She had a close relationship with her dad. And of course, if you've seen Captain Marvel, they messed that all up, which I felt like was a disservice to the character. I won't dwell on that, but it was a disservice to the character and was outright wrong, I think, because I feel like that there was some type of statement that was wanting to be made, and I get that, but this character is who she is because of the relationship she had with her parents in the comics, and to change that and
I know what you're talking about.
That wasn't cool to me. But anyway, the character's played by Tiana Paris, and she does an excellent job. She fits into the mold. She was introduced at the Comic-Con, I think it was the year before last or last year, when they were talking about Wandavision, and I knew from there she fit the role. She had the look, she had the hairstyle, she had everything that I would have envisioned Monica Rambeau to be. She had it all. And so in episode 4, she's introduced because she is returning to life after the blip. So basically she was dusted, and when people were dusted, they ceased to exist. So there was no I'm stuck in a alternate reality with the consciousness. They were just gone. So after the events of Endgame, when they were snapped back, it was like they came back in the same exact place that they were snapped. when they were dusted. So she just happens to have been in the hospital room where her mother was when she was dusted. And 5 years later, she's returned to that same hospital room, and she discovers that her mother, who had cancer and at that time had beaten cancer and was on the road to recovery, had since had another flare-up of cancer, and it killed her, and she had died. So imagine the nightmare of the last thing that you remember, your mother was recuperating from having beaten cancer, only you find out that 5 years have passed, you come back, and your mother's been gone for, I think, 2 of those years, and how devastating that is. And I mean, I felt for her character. She really played that part very well. The whole initial shock and how she dealt with that. I thought that was, when I saw that scene, I was like, oh yeah, now we're getting into it. I was really excited about that. And so we are introduced to Tyler Haywood, who is the director of Sword. Now, Sword was created by Monica's mother, Maria, who happens to was the best friend of Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, who was introduced in the Captain Marvel movie. And so since Monica wasn't around, Tyler took over as director of the agency. And so that is like, wow, not only did she come back and her mother had passed, but now there's somebody else who's taken her mother's spot and who tells her, well, since you were gone, there's protocols. You're no longer a pilot. You're no longer going on space missions. You're grounded. And, it just, the layers keep coming for her. And I think that the character and the actress did a very good job. We are also introduced to Jimmy Woo, who was first introduced to us in the Ant-Man film. Right. He's an FBI agent, and they're there assigned to look into missing people from Westview and how the town is, you can't go through. It's like a barrier there. It's like it's been taken over, right? And so they go there. Sword has established a base around the town, and they send in drones to investigate. They've even brought in Dr. Darcy Lewis, who was introduced to us in the Thor film as a trainee and colleague of Jane Foster, who's now got her doctorate. And so she's played by Kat Dennings, by the way. And so Randall Park plays Jimmy Woo. If you watch The Office, he was on there. He's been around, so you've seen him. But what I wanted to say about this particular episode is that we learn that Geraldine is, in fact, Monica Rambeau. And we also learned that there's a signal that's being broadcast that actually broadcasts everything that's happening inside what's now known as the Hex. And it's called the Hex because they're like little sections that are hexagonal in shape. And hexagonal is like the strongest natural shape in nature, besides the triangle. And so with that being the case, it denotes how strong this barrier is, how strong the Hex is, and how impenetrable it is.
And kind of hints as to who's behind it all.
Right, exactly. And for all the old head comics, Wanda had Hex powers like back in the day, and that was a prime thing, and that was how it was described because hence the moniker Scarlet Witch. But
yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe a hex is a witchcraft spell of sorts, is another name for a hex. And exactly. So, I mean, it was a lot of wordplay going on there. I really appreciated it. It made it clearer to some people is exactly what was going on and who was responsible, even though I'm convinced she wasn't even fully aware that she was causing as much as she was.
Right. And so we also see through a flashback with Monica how she came to be in the hex. Her and Jimmy Woo are there, and Monica is very curious, so she decides to put her hand into the barrier, and part of it goes through, and the next thing you know, her entire body is sucked in. So that's how she ended up inside the hex. So then the next episode we have on a very special episode, which happens in sitcoms a lot. You'd have a special episode that dealt with some type of situation, or maybe a holiday or something. So, or even a crossover sometime, depending upon what it was. This was set on the inside of the hex. It was set in the 1980s, early 90s. Wanda and Vision struggle to stop Billy and Tommy from crying. And, if you a parent, babies can cry, and they're like, what am I going to do to get them to stop? And so Agnes comes over, always at the right time. Agnes pops up in their house. And it's like, she just sometimes didn't even wait to be, who is it or whatnot. She just walks in. And so Agnes, she just walks in, and she knows exactly what to do. And then they realize the babies have stopped crying. And the next thing you know, they're 5 years old, and they're sitting on the steps, and they're like, what is going on? And so, now these kids are growing at astronomical rates. She went through the pregnancy before. She was 3 months, and the next thing you know, she's 6 months. And then before you knew it, she was delivering the babies. So time doesn't, pass the same way here. And so next thing you know, there's a dog that they're washing in the kitchen sink. And, this is like, oh, wow, where'd the dog come from? Well, they found him outside or whatnot. And so Vision doesn't want them to have a pet. And he says, well, let's tell them, they can't have a dog until they're 10. Next thing you know, they age to the age of 10. And it's like, wow, And so the dog is playing around the socket, the electrical socket. And then they come up with the name Sparky, which is a connection to the comics, because there was a mechanical dog Vision created for his mechanical family named Sparky. And hence that's where that came from. And Agnes, is there, and Wanda's really freely using her magic. And to Vision, that's like, Wanda, what are you doing? Agnes is right there. And then Wanda's like, oh, she didn't see anything, and this kind of thing. So this is kind of getting Vision to think, there's something going on here. I'm not sure exactly what. And then it starts to introduce the outside world to inside the hex, because at work then you get an email, and during this time emails like new. People didn't understand it really unless they were working with technology. So only, it wasn't like today where every kid in America has an email address from the age of 5 or 10. These were adults who had no idea what email was, and email, what's that? So anyway, they get an email message from Sword that reveals the situation in Westview, and he breaks through to a real Westview resident and learns that Wanda is controlling the town. And so this is a revelation for Vision that his suspicions were right. Something's not going on. Wanda's, doing some stuff that he's not happy with and doesn't feel is right. So Sword sends in a drone from the 1980s into the hex, and Sparky the dog runs off. Hayward orders the drone to be used to kill Wanda, but she emerges from the barrier and warns Hayward to leave her alone. And then we return back into the barrier, and Agnes has found Sparky is dead. Apparently he'd eaten some of her bushes. How convenient. Vision confronts Wanda about her actions. And then they're interrupted by someone at the door, which is a common occurrence in this show. It was a trope in sitcoms. It always is. There's always somebody at the door. And we are confronted with silver hair cascading down the back of a head of someone standing there, and Monica and Wanda is in shock, and she says, and then we pan the camera around and we see Evan Peters Pietro. Evan Peters played the character of Pietro Maximoff in the X-Men films that were at Fox. And so this is like, wow, this is not the Pietro from the MCU, which is played by Aaron Taylor, but this is the Fox Quicksilver. And so that's like this big mystery. And then while watching the broadcast on the outside of the Hex, Darcy's like, oh no, they've recast Pietro. And that was the whole joke or whatever with it. Yeah. And then we have the all new Halloween Spooktacular. And this is set in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Wanda wants to spend Tommy and Billy's first Halloween together as a family. Vision tells her he has to go and patrol the streets with the neighborhood watch, and Pietro offers to step in as a father figure and takes the boys trick-or-treating, causing mischief with his super speed. And suddenly Tommy has inherited this super speed, and we have Billy, who has begin manifesting telepathy and telekinesis powers like his mother. And then you have Vision, who at this point is suspicious of everything, and that's why he's going on patrol, because he's trying to see what's going on, and he finds the end of the barrier of the Hex, and he confronts Agnes, who's in a car and is acting confused. Vision speaks to Agnes's real self, and she tells him that he is dead, and he's confused by this, as he has no memory of any of the events prior to he and Wanda entering Westview. And so outside you have Hayward, who orders Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy to leave the base for disagreeing with his decision to attack Wanda. And they aren't going for that, so they sneak back inside and try to uncover any intel that they can. And they realize that Hayward has been tracking the Vision inside the Hex's vibranium signature, and Vision tries to push through the barrier, and he begins to disintegrate. And then Billy senses this is happening and tells Wanda, who expands the barrier and encompasses
pretty much the bubble,
right, and it encompasses the entire sword base, and several sword agents are enveloped into the new boundary, and Vision is saved. But we see it right before this, she's talking to the boys, and then here comes Pietro saying, oh, no one's going to be worried about your already dead husband. It's not like he can die twice. This pisses Wanda off, and she blasts him, into some fixtures for the Halloween decorations and stuff like that. And so this is the second third of this series. And, I thought that we're really getting into the thick of it. I was really excited by every episode. I was thinking, wow, what's going to happen next? I was at this point, like, I can't wait for next Friday, right? Because it was like so much anticipation for what's going on. And then I had my theories, and then there were all these different Easter eggs that, popped up with regards to the show. And it was just one of those situations where now I'm engaged. Now I'm excited, and I'm ready to see what happens next. What about you, RJ?
Yeah, wow. There's a lot. Okay. Let's go back to episode 4. So I knew Monica Rambeau. I say Rambeau. It annoys me. They say Rambo in the program. It's spelled like you would pronounce it, Rambo. it's irrelevant and silly, but it was one of the first things where I disagree with the creators, and that's just it. I'm right. But I knew her well because she was in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16. And that was her first appearance, and I remember it. I think that was maybe 1985 or so, but I still remember much about that issue to this day because it was such a spectacular debut for such an interesting character, and I really loved seeing and confirming that they were bringing that version of Captain Marvel into the MCU. So I was very excited for that. I was unaware of the history with her parents, but I could see how that would annoy you, John. It was great to see Jimmy Woo come back, and I really love seeing Darcy return. You know, she hadn't been in the MCU for so long. I thought maybe the actress had gone on to do other things, and she just wasn't interested in coming back to these movies, and it was a delight to see that they brought that character back because she was an early favorite. But anyway, she was a favorite from way back, and she'd been dormant a long time. And I thought I hadn't bothered to look the actress up to see if she had just moved on to other things, but I really love seeing her come back. She's always been a favorite, and we had just recently rewatched Ant-Man and the Wasp here at the house, so Jimmy Woo was fresh, and the FBI agent was fresh in my mind, and it was great to see him return and see some growth with his character. Really quick, I'm curious if Tyler Hayward has a comic book history. I don't want to get too much into it, but is he made up for the show, or does that character actually cause expectations for a comic reader? It's unfamiliar to me.
He is made up for the show. That was the first thing the Deep Divers did, and I did it myself because I don't remember every name of every secondary character, so I have to go and check this out. You know, it didn't sound familiar, but you never know because we're talking, like
there's a lot of history.
Sure. There's like 60 years of history, here. So lot to go through. The other things I wanted to mention real quick was that each episode coming up to this had their own little theme music, and the theme music was very much like the sitcoms of old. I think they really did an excellent job of that, and if you listen to the lyrics, it's telling you exactly what's happening, and it's kind of clever. I thought that it was kind of cool and clever that the way that they did that. Also, when we get into the 70s episodes, it's taking little bits of the Partridge Family, Brady Bunch, and like those types of sitcoms, family sitcoms of that era, and using them, using some of the tropes from them and some of the feel of that era. Which if you grew up in the 70s, you kind of, you were anticipating the Brady Bunch coming on, you were watching, the Partridge Family and, things of that nature that was coming on TV. That's what we were watching as little kids back then. So, that brought back some memories. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to mention the music because I thought it stood out. Is it Christopher Beck? Is that right?
I believe
I'm gonna look it up right now. Anyway, I noticed his name on Ant-Man and the Wasp, a couple of other Marvel shows, and I've always found his themes stand out a little bit better. Apparently that's him. Whenever his name would pop up, you know how some themes especially when you're dealing with action, it's a little more generic, thumping beats and that sort of thing. And I always found he's a little bit more melodic, and he really had a lot of room to stretch his talents and show them off here on this show. So I really thought the music contributed a lot to the tone overall of the series. And hats off to him. I'm not super familiar with his work except other things he's done for Marvel, but I notice he was on Ant-Man and the Wasp, and the music there I thought was most exceptional. So, I had, there were little things going on as more things were revealed. I wasn't familiar with Sword as an entity. It didn't mean much to me. I understood, the idea that it was the next generation of Shield. It doesn't give me any expectations one way or the other. It's for me, it was just sort of an interesting. It just kind of reminds me of how long it's been since I've seriously collected comics. When something like that comes up, that's obviously such a big deal, and I don't know that much about it. And then, yeah, so as we get into a very special episode, it's pretty obvious Agnes is pretty key to what's going on at this point. The nosy neighbor thing was getting so beyond normal, and I wasn't entirely sure if she was behind a lot of it or if she was manipulating certain parts of it. It wasn't entirely clear, but I knew that she was definitely the character to keep an eye on at that point. And then when Pietro showed up at the door, I love that twist. I think it made perfect sense to take advantage of, just from a behind the scenes standpoint, take advantage of the fact that you now own all the characters, and find a way to bring Quicksilver back as simply as possible. I mean, Spider-Man has already introduced a multiverse idea. We know that that's going to come up in Doctor Strange. It's already been established. Why not just play around with things a little bit and make it simple for yourself? Because he was really a lot of fun in the X-Men movies, and I would really enjoy seeing him come back as the Quicksilver character. Jumping ahead, doesn't look like that's going to necessarily happen, but I think that I would be okay if they did that. Really got a big kick out of the Halloween episode. I love their homage to their 70s and 80s looks with their Halloween costumes. they looked like something from the Stan Lee, John Byrne era or somewhere around there. It was very bright, the bright colored Vision, and the Scarlet Witch costume that doesn't quite translate exactly as as drawn on Wanda, I thought was terrific. And now I have a question for you, John. I know you know the answer, but I couldn't quite pinpoint it. I know that one of the twins was dressed as the old Quicksilver from the comics, and the other one looks so familiar to me, but I could not figure out whose costume he was wearing. It was the purple looking thing.
Well, both of those characters, and I'll just give our audience a little bit of back history. Both of those characters were created back in the 80s initially as the children of Wanda and Vision. And it just so happens that, they were shards of a demon trying to enter into the real world. And their souls were trapped in hell until they were dispersed back out and placed into the bodies of some young children who, by the time that this was discovered, had become teenagers. And those teenagers were Speed and Wiccan. And that is the costumes you were referring to, because those colors that they wear denote the characters in the comics who were members of the Young Avengers, which was a group much like the Teen Titans to the JLA in Marvel Comics. And Speed has Quicksilver-like powers, and Wiccan has, supernatural witch sorceress types abilities, much like his mother Wanda. And
so the one twin wasn't dressed as Quicksilver?
He was dressed as Quicksilver, but in the comics he also wore a costume that was very similar to Quicksilver. So it was kind of one of those situations where they were doing that nod. Gotcha. They were also being funny to say, like, taking a poke at DC that a lot of people didn't realize, because the Flash of the Silver Age, Barry Allen, when he was first introduced, not long after he was first introduced, had a sidekick named Wally West. And Wally West was Kid Flash. And Kid Flash's costume was an exact copy of the Flash's in the very beginning. So they were kind of playing that out like that. I thought that that was kind of cool. The idea that they, went that direction, I thought was kind of cool. But yeah, they are very much playing the parts of the characters that they played in the comics. And one other thing to mention of note about Wanda and Vision is that their comic book costumes, they were going for comic book accurate costumes with the Halloween costumes that they wore. Wanda's got the gold star for being most comic accurate. And so we have that as well. But one other thing I wanted to mention is that they were going for the ridiculousness of the comic accurate costumes, like you mentioned, with regards to Wanda and Vision. Now, I have to admit, despite the fact that it's not practical and, it was ridiculous with regards to being comic accurate, the most accurate was Wanda's Halloween costume.
Yes.
It was very much like she stepped right out of the comic books from back in the day, from the pink leggings to everything, the headpiece, everything was just very, very much comic book accurate. Vision's was but you could kind of tell more that it was a Halloween costume that was kind of hobbled together or whatnot, much like Pietro's and so forth. But to answer your question with regards to the twins, yes, if you may not have noticed this, but the characters throughout, since they were first introduced, they wore the color themes from their characters from Young Avengers. That is, again, Speed, who has the powers very much like Quicksilver, and Wiccan, who has powers like Wanda. And Tommy is Speed and Billy is Wiccan. So just so a lot of people may not realize that. So a lot of people thought that the twins were gone for good at the conclusion of this series. And I knew better, because I knew that those two characters were prominent members of the Young Avengers. So I knew that Marvel had mentioned that they were interested in creating a Young Avengers film or TV show. So I knew that these were two of the founding members of the team, and they're introducing Kate Bishop's Hawkeye. They've introduced Cassie Lang, Ant-Man's daughter, and they're going to be introducing the Patriot, who is the grandson of the Black Captain America from the comics, in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So basically, they weren't going to get rid of these characters like that. I knew that going in, and so it turns out I was right, but I kind of knew that. And I know that the MCU doesn't do everything like the comics, but those were two more important characters that I didn't expect them to introduce and just brush off so easily. And I think that when it comes to the costuming for this show from start to finish, I think that they did an excellent job. I commend them on that. This concludes part 2 of our discussion and review of WandaVision. Join us on Monday for part 3. And until then, stay nerdy. The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by OG Nerds, a new social media community dedicated to nerds of a certain age, 40 and over, although all are welcome. Members are encouraged to share articles and links on their favorite nerdy topics such as animation, anime, art, books, writing, comics, manga, movies, music, sports, tech, science, TV, video games, RPGs, and more.
Be sure to visit them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.